Well, hello, everybody. My name is Tim Downs. I'm the executive producer of the Connectivity Expo, and I'll be the moderator for today's Senza Fili Sparring Partners webinar. This is how it works. We have two very knowledgeable people on the webinar. They're going to engage in some dialogue and provide some insight into the subject matter, which, as you know, is CBRS and OnGo, and the state of the industry, business models, and updates on just the nature of the technology and also the business opportunity as we see it. There is not going to be any slides, and feel free to contribute your own questions and insight as well. And as we get to that, we'll add those to the conversation. Please do us a favor and keep the conversation polite and on topic and respectful. And I think if everyone does that, we'll have a much more beneficial hour and learn a lot on the way. So let me introduce our two panelists. Dave Wright is the president of the CBRS Alliance, and also joining us is Monica Paolini of Senza Fili Consulting, who is one of the most foremost folks in the industry who watches and follows the CBRS goings on. So Dave, why don't I turn it over to you? Why don't you give us a little update on the Alliance, what's going on with the Alliance, and just a general update in the technology.
Thanks, Tim. Happy to. I feel like I should come out punching or something from my corner, you know, now that we're doing the sparring thing. But yes, thanks again. So Dave Wright, I am president of the Alliance, and to give you a little bit of context about the Alliance, we came together 2.5 years ago now, so August of 2016, 6 founding members, and we really were looking at the optimization of LTE and next generation cellular technologies in the CBRS band. So as many of you know, CBRS is a little bit different. It's not like exclusively licensed spectrum where LTE and cellular technologies have traditionally operated. So there were some optimizations needed to make LTE work as best as possible and as efficiently as possible in a shared spectrum band. So that was one of the primary undertakings of the Alliance. Again, started with 6 founding members. As of today, we're 120 members. So the growth in the organization has been pretty phenomenal. We've gone up to 120, but probably as importantly, or even more importantly, you look at the breadth and the variety of types of members that we have. So we have all of the Tier 1 U.S. mobile network operators. We have the largest cable operators in the U.S. as members. We have chipset providers. We have cellular infrastructure vendors. We have enterprise wireless LAN solution companies, tower companies, neutral host solution providers. And then more recently, we've diversified into a whole bunch of industries which really represent more the end user community. So those would include things like commercial property management, hospitality, industrial use cases, healthcare, as well as education. And I should have also mentioned the fixed wireless community, because that's one of definitely the leading use cases for CBRS. So 120 members. Our work is really set up in 5 different areas. So we have 5 different working groups. That's the technology working group. And again, we're not looking to recreate the wheel here. So if there are specifications that 3GPP has developed, or there's work that's been done in WinForum around the sort of base operationalization of the CBRS framework, the Alliance is not looking to recreate that work, but we're looking to fill any gaps that exist, especially again regarding LTE and now 5G NR operation in the band. So that's the technical work. We have a certification and test working group, and the idea there is really to drive interoperability. So we want end users to be able to select equipment that has been authorized and certified by the Alliance, and know that if they buy RAN infrastructure equipment from vendor A, that it works with the spectrum access system from vendor B, and potentially the domain proxy or the coexistence manager, even from a different vendor. Eventually, we plan to extend that probably down to the client space as well. There will be certain capabilities and services that the Alliance develops, which will actually include a component on the client. And so at that point, you'd actually want a OnGo certified client. And I should mention right up front, OnGo is the brand that the Alliance launched in May of 2018, so almost a year ago. We launched the OnGo brand, and that's what we're driving our interoperability and our certification around. So you'll see OnGo certified test labs and now OnGo certified equipment. Today, that means RAN equipment. In the future, you may see OnGo certified clients as well. So that's certification and test. We have a business working group, which is really looking again at the end user segments and what their business requirements are and how that drives technical development as well as our marketing activities. We have a deployment and operations working group, which is looking at some of the unique, just the unique facets of deploying a CBRS network for private uses as well as in the kind of in-building cellular/neutral host type of a use case. So that's deployment and operations. And then finally, our fifth major activity is marketing, and that's just market awareness, making sure people understand what CBRS is, what the Alliance has developed, what we're doing with our certification program, and just preparing the market for this technology. So that's a quick overview on the Alliance.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Monica, do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, and well, first of all, I want to remind everybody that, well, this is in preparation for ConnectX. And Tim, I would like you to introduce that because this is an opportunity for you as you get ready to pack for the show later in May to ask all the questions. So feel free to ask all the questions as we go. So, in typical webinars, we go to the Q&A at the end. But here, since we don't have a script, we don't have slides, we're going to take your questions as we go along, and Tim will pass them on to us if we cannot read them as we're busy talking to you guys. So feel free to ask any questions as we go along. Don't wait until the end because we might not have an official Q&A. The Q&A is the whole webinar. And but Tim, I would like to ask you to tell us a little bit about what to expect about CBRS at ConnectX. Last year it was quite a great show, and there was a lot of CBRS there. So is it going to be the same this year?
It is, and I appreciate you asking that. The show is called ConnectX, Connectivity Expo. It takes place May 20 through 22nd in Orlando, Florida. The website is easy to find, connectivityexpo.com. And we are focused in large part around 5G and disruptive wireless technologies, of which I believe CBRS OnGo is the most exciting and disruptive community in our industry right now. So the way shows work, we have 3 tiers that we offer any attendee, anybody who wants to understand what OnGo is and what the opportunity is. The first is a technology demonstration area. The CBRS Alliance has more than 35 of their members who are on the show floor who will be talking and demonstrating CBRS components or their solution in the CBRS community. We also have an educational track that's part of the main conference track that we've branded private, or not branded, but we've labeled private LTE. We believe that that's a way that no one else is really talking about, at least in the show or in the conference world, what CBRS will enable. So we think that's a high growth and an area of high interest. Finally, the CBRS Alliance itself has its own, what we call a deep dive workshop. That's on Monday, the 21st. That is really your best opportunity to get a complete soup to nuts understanding of the history of CBRS, the framework of the spectrum sharing, the technology itself, and its evolution and where leaders such as Dave and Monica really see it going. So I would encourage anyone who is interested in the CBRS discussion to attend the CBRS Alliance workshop on Monday the 21st. It's probably the most comprehensive understanding they'll get from both sides of the equation, technology as well as business case. So there you have it, and thanks, Monica.
Okay, thanks, Tim, and both Dave and I will be there. I look forward to see you there. So let's get started. I see that there are already a few questions. Great to hear that. I see that, and I think you can see, or you should be able to see, the questions that you're all asking. So there is no way for us to hide. And also, you can use the Q&A to add any comments. If you don't think we answer the questions correctly, if you have another take, feel free to add your comments in there as well. But before, just to get us started, the question that I get all the time right now is, so is CBRS commercial yet? What's next? Is it real? Because, it actually, when you think about it, it's actually been pretty quick. It's very easy to get restless to see, well, is it happened yet? But it hasn't really been taking a long time. If you consider how innovative the new way of using the spectrum is. So I think that it's actually at the end of the day, it's actually pretty fast. The process was pretty fast. And now there's a lot of excitement. We are pretty much there. So Dave, when are we going to see, the real CBRS network commercial live on scale?
Okay, great question. And yeah, I'll just go ahead. And I don't feel like I'm sparring here. I feel like I'm agreeing, but I guess that's okay. So yes, it's been, a relatively short process, but that doesn't mean that there hasn't been a tremendous amount of work that hasn't gone on over the last, really 4 or 5 years. If you go back to when the Wireless Innovation Forum, or WIN Forum, started working on, functional requirements, and then, identifying, protocol interface characteristics, et cetera. I mean, that's literally 5 years of work. And don't forget that this is not just an industry activity. We focus on what WIN Forum has done, what CBRS Alliance has done, and that's all incredibly important. But none of that would have been possible absent the participation and the collaboration of a number of federal agencies. I'm sure most of the people on the call are familiar with the fact that CBRS, one of the fundamental presuppositions of this is that we're sharing spectrum with federal and, in fact, military users. So, the Department of Defense has been involved in this from the beginning, making sure that the protection mechanisms are effective, and then also ensuring that things like operational security aren't being compromised through the way that we're protecting those incumbents. So there's been a tremendous amount of collaboration and joint development between industry and DoD, and then also the commission, that is the FCC, as well as NTIA, which is the agency that oversees all the federal spectrum. So, that work has been going on for a long time now. And the good news is, to answer your question more directly, Monica, we are really on the verge of the commercial launch of services. So the commission, that is again the FCC, laid out a program to get to initial commercial deployments, they called it. And those proposals were submitted by the SAS administrators. You had to put together a proposal of what you wanted to do in initial commercial deployment phase. Those proposals have been in from the SAS admins for quite some time now. And what we've been waiting for is really 4 things. You need 4 things to get to commercial service. You need authorized radio equipment, or RAN. You need authorized clients. You need certified or authorized ESCs, and ESCs are the sensing capability which protects these military incumbent systems. And then fourthly, you need the authorized spectrum access systems, or the SASs themselves. And so the good news here is that the CBSDs, which are essentially CBRS small cells for the RAN equipment, started being authorized in September of last year. So as of today, there are 37 Part 96 or CBRS authorized CBSDs, according to the FCC. And then the second component was authorized clients. There are 21 authorized clients. I saw there was a question about how the smartphone ecosystem is coming along, so I'll try to work that into my answer, or we'll address it later. So we have 21 authorized client devices for CBRS. The third component I mentioned was the environmental sensing capability. And the good news there, again, is that the ESCs that have been proposed for CBRS to make it operational, those went through the lab testing phase, and the FCC essentially contracted with ITS, which is the Institute for Telecommunication Services, and ITS is a department, or I should say a division of NTIA. And so ITS has been doing, or had done the lab testing of the ESCs through the end of last year, and they actually announced right before Christmas that that was all complete. The reports were developed, and then unfortunately we kind of lost some time when the government shut down, because a lot of the participants were affected by that shutdown. But right after the government reopened, the reports on the ESCs were finalized and have been submitted. And so everything I'm hearing is that the ESCs are probably going to be authorized in the very near future. So that's really good news on the ESC front. With the spectrum access systems, or the SASs themselves, they are in the last phase of lab testing right now. And, you know, if things go according to plan, that could even complete in the next few days. Then there'll be a report preparation phase for them. They'll go over to the Commission for review. And we are very excited to be looking at the initial commercial deployments very late Q2, or it could be the first part of Q3 at this point.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how that works out, because there's a lot of clear, you know, plans, a lot of planned deployments for CBRS. But unlike for other technologies, what we're going to see is very different type of deployments, coexisting and being launched at the same time. So you would have mobile operators, enterprises, cable operators, fixed wireless. So it will be interesting to see how they all, you know, start from the, you know, get started. So I think that it's going to be more interesting than other technologies where, you know, like cellular technologies will typically go on, you know, cellular license bands from mobile operators. Here, we will see much more of a variety. And yet, I think that from talking to people, and Dave, I would like to hear what you think about it, a clear, you know, at the very beginning, we will see some of the enterprises going first and fixed as well, because there you have much more control over the end-to-end ecosystem. Because even if, or sorry, even when, because we know that CBRS will be in the devices, it doesn't mean that even if the devices are available, they're going to be widespread, because for each technology, it takes some time for people to buy new phones. So, you know, that's inherently a slower process. In an enterprise where you control what devices are on the network, you will have 100% CBRS devices on day one for the devices that you choose to have. Same thing for fixed wireless. So, and that I think is going to be in many ways the most interesting part, because it's the most disruptive part. I don't know whether in terms of the number, the size of the deployment, but in terms of the disruptive business model, I think it's going to be, the enterprise is going to be the most disruptive one. But in terms of, Dave, maybe you can say a little bit what you think about in terms of who's going to go first. So my take would be, you know, enterprise, fixed first. What do you think?
I think looking at some of the information that was released about the initial commercial deployments in particular, if we use those as sort of the definition of, you know, real, you know, first movers, people who wanted to be a part of that, what we call ICD process. One of the SAS admins put out some information, it was summary information, but put out some of the information about the types of deployments that they had included in their proposal for ICD. And it really was a wide range. So, you know, as you were talking about sort of the traditional rollouts of cellular fully licensed bands, that tends to be a mobile operator only story. And I was thinking about a lot of the stories that have been coming out recently about some of the millimeter wave deployments, and it's been AT&T and Verizon, mostly, at least that I've read about so far. And I would agree with you, Monica. I think that here, we'll see stories about what the MNOs are doing, and I think there'll be certain MNOs that lead on CBRS, as there were certain ones that decided to lead with the millimeter wave 5G services. But I think you'll also see cable industry moving quickly on this. If you check the record, you see there's been a lot of trial activity and filings for experimental licenses by the large cable operators in the U.S. as well. The two leading ones already have mobile broadband services that they leverage their MVNO relationships with the MNOs for. But they would certainly like to roll out their own cellular footprint where they have HFC, those hybrid fiber coax networks. So I think you'll see early activity from cable as well. And again, that may be one or two companies that sort of lead in that sector. I would agree with you. Fixed wireless is a natural first mover. Again, as you said, if you can control both endpoints with the base station as well as the CPE, then you don't have to wait for handsets to get into the market and then to reach critical mass in order to support your business case. So I think fixed wireless will be an early use case. And then enterprise/industrial. Again, it's if you can close both ends of the loop and control that from an equipment perspective, then it becomes relatively straightforward. And I think we use the term enterprise, and frankly, it's a very imprecise term, and I struggle with that because enterprise encompasses everything from small medium businesses to Fortune 500 to stadiums to hospitality to healthcare. Education, we throw all of that under enterprise, and it's really, a bunch of different sectors, and they each have their own interests. So I think you'll see some of the sectors moving quicker. I think there's a few that the value proposition around private LTE, back to Tim's point about private LTE sort of growing in importance. That was a topic I heard a ton about this year at Mobile World Congress, by the way. I think there are a few enterprise verticals where private LTE services make a tremendous amount of sense. Certainly industrial, they've been clamoring for this, not only in the US, but overseas as well. But also, again, healthcare, financial services, their use cases and their ROIs are pretty obvious. So I think you'll see all of those moving pretty quickly here. On the smartphones, if I could real quick, I don't want to talk too much, but I did want to answer the question that somebody had already raised about smartphone ecosystems. So we do already have 4 authorized handsets. So I don't necessarily want to steal people's thunder, and these haven't all been, they haven't all made their big marketing announcements. I think they're going to plan to do that in conjunction with the commercial launches by the carriers. But if you go to the FCC's equipment authorization page, you can do a search on CBE equipment. CBE stands for CBRS end user equipment, and you'll see that there are 3 flagship smartphones that have CBRS support today, or have CBRS authorization today, and there's one push-to-talk handset as well. And yes, we certainly expect additional handsets, including other flagships, to be authorized this year.
Now, let me add something to the ecosystem. The CBRS band, it's a separate band, but the frequency itself, it's used worldwide for 5G. So there is no question that from a handset point of view and other devices point of view, the support is going to be easy from a band perspective. So there is no question that the upcoming devices will be able to support the band. Clearly, however, in order to be a CBRS device, you need to be also receive separate certification. But my understanding is that there is not a whole lot of work, and this is really great news, because if you were doing CBRS in the band and nobody else was using anywhere else in the world, there would be a major issues in terms of will there be a market? In this case, there is really no question. But however, that brings the question of whether CBRS is going to move to 5G. So I will ask you that question, and then since we are being flooded by questions from the audience, I suggest that we just go through them. Actually, 5G is one of the questions, so maybe you can address about the CBRS.
Okay. Yeah. Great. So yeah, I mean, just to add a little bit more background to what you said, Monica, so everybody understands it's very hard to try to do something innovative and to create a hardware ecosystem at the same time. In fact, I tend to think that those things are almost mutually exclusive. You can do one, but you probably can't do both at the same time in the same band. And so one thing that we try to make clear is that we're only trying to do something innovative. We aren't trying to create a hardware ecosystem here because frankly, it already existed. You know, band 42 and band 43 are the global TDD LTE bands that have been defined, goodness, for I think 8 or 10 years now. And they've been available in, you know, in Japan, for instance, for coming up on, I think it was 3 years ago this summer that the Japanese carriers launched their band 42 services. So yeah, chipsets both on the RAN side and on the client side have been available for some time. And you know, not to minimize anything, but you know, if you've got a radio and all the front end that supports band 42, 43, it's relatively easy to adapt that to support band 48. And band 48 is the CBRS band definition, I should say the 3GPP band definition for CBRS LTE operation. There's a new band definition being finalized right now, which will be for 5G NR in the CBRS band. But yeah, we're absolutely leveraging that. So, you know, the devices that I mentioned that have been you know, CBRS authorized by the commission essentially all had their heritage with band 42 and 43, and then they were adapted to support band 48, which gives them the CBRS support. So now to answer the 5G question, yes, 5G NR you know, is certainly incredibly important going forward. You know, we're seeing the early, you know, some of the early results from millimetric wave 5G deployments in some cities in the U.S. We had the White House event a couple weeks ago, I think it was, where the president and Chairman Pai talked about the importance of 5G and some of the steps that the administration and the commission were taking to you know, to really encourage and accelerate 5G deployments. And what was interesting was a lot of the spectrum conversation there was really millimeter wave. And I've seen a number of stories since then talking about, you know, what are we doing in the mid-band, since that has been the focus. And I think, Monica, you made the point that a lot of other areas of the world are really focusing on the mid-band, which, you know, let's arbitrarily say that's 3.4 to 4.2 gigahertz, just for the sake of kind of the major activity around the globe for 5G. So, you know, there's been a lot of questions about what are we doing for mid-band 5G in the U.S., and I would contend CBRS is the first major step that the U.S. is taking in that regard. In fact, I was just looking at some comments that Commissioner Mike O'Reilly made last week at a 5G event up in Brooklyn, and he talked about CBRS as being the first step for mid-band spectrum for 5G. And so, you know, we certainly understand that at the Alliance. We've begun a work program around 5G NR operation in the band, and specifically looking at how LTE services and 5G services would most efficiently coexist and cooperate together in the band. There's been, you know, it's worth highlighting that there's going to be some confusion going forward about spectrum sharing and dynamic sharing. Because you're starting to see a lot of carriers and cellular infrastructure companies talk about LTE 5G sharing, so that they can start refarming these bands from LTE to 5G, but to do it over time and have a period of coexistence in the interim. And so you can sort of look at the work that the CBRS Alliance is doing in that same light, that we're looking to, you know, make the most efficient use of the spectrum while supporting simultaneous LTE and 5G NR operation in the frequencies together. And that started late last year. That work did in the Alliance, and we're planning to include it in our Release 3 specifications, which should be out in the Q4 timeframe.
Yes, and the CBRS regulation is all technology agnostic. So the way the SaaS works is completely independent from the interface. So whoever deploys CBRS, they can just use whichever interface. So regardless of the CBRS Alliance, what the CBRS Alliance is doing, everybody can deploy whatever they want. So, and I think that's increasingly the approach. I know, typically it makes sense to use a standard-based solution because you have more vendors and things like that. But anybody can deploy whatever they want. Now, there is one question that I see. It's about CBRS providing in-building services like LAN and 5G and devices. The question is also, how can you find the vendors? One thing that I would say is that in-building is actually going to be a crucial part. It's not written anywhere in the regulation, or it's not a regulatory issue, but the spectrum sharing that CBRS allows encourages in-building coverage. And I think that this is a very important issue, because if you look at in-building coverage, clearly there is a need from the enterprise and in public venues. And small cells have not been able to up to this point, to address that market because of all sorts of issues that we're not going to get into this right now. But with CBRS and with private networks, I believe there is a very important way to get more indoor coverage and use small cells technology that it's already there. So again, as I was saying before, what CBRS has been able to do is to be disruptive, but also leverage a lot of the development in the industry that we've seen in the last few years. So this is really a good CBRS. The way I see it's a good technology that puts together a lot of the things that we need to have and we have available from a technology point of view to deploy services that we need. And indoor coverage clearly is one of them. And I was just thinking when we were talking before about spectrum, a few years ago in the old WiMAX days, people were skeptical about using 2.5 because it was too high of a frequency for mobility. And now we're 3.5 and we're pretty comfortable. And I think that this is actually very important. We're able to use more spectrum at higher frequencies, and the lack of reach. So clearly, the higher up you go in spectrum, the lower the coverage area is. Used to be a major issue, used to be a problem, and that's why nobody would use a millimeter wave, because what would you do with it? And now that we need densification, we need to cover, and we need to reduce interference. It's actually a good thing to be in a higher band. So I think that's all working very well. But Dave, let me ask you, since you know it better than I do, how do you find a vendor for CBRS? If you want to develop, if you have on a project.
I mean, I was going to say that the easiest thing to do might just be to go to the CBRS Alliance website. So if you go to cbrsalliance.org and you look at our members, you'll see some pretty well-known names in the enterprise space. I think the question was, I'm trying to find that question again. Scroll down a little bit here, but where did it go? There it is. Oh. Right. So lands for IG. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, if you go to our website, you'll see a number of companies there that have expertise in building systems, whether that's coming more from a sort of enterprise wireless LAN background or more from a DAS or cellular background. But you'll see some well-known names there, and you could reach out to them. But if you really want to get a better sense of it, I'd suggest you come down to Orlando in a few weeks and stop by the exhibition pavilion that the Alliance is setting up with ConnectX. And again, as Tim mentioned, we'll have 35 of our members demonstrating their products and their solutions there, including a number of in-building solutions.
Yeah, I would also add to that, there's a question here about how will telcos benefit from CBRS, and I think there's several folks from leading telcos who are speaking at both the workshop and also ConnectX educational program. So there are some programs and some use cases going or case studies that you'll hear from, and that's just one of them.
Yeah, and I think that this is actually an interesting topic because clearly operators and other service providers, especially neutral hosts, have a great interest in CBRS. But the question is what role will they play? So clearly there is the obvious one. It's just more spectrum that they can use for their existing services. That's pretty clear. More spectrum is always valuable. But also, when you look at it from the neutral host and also the operator point of view, they can work with the enterprise to deploy CBRS in the enterprise. So from the enterprise point of view, if you look at it from the enterprise side, clearly there is a need to go beyond Wi-Fi. So they're going to keep their Wi-Fi network. They also need something else. And the question is, if you are an enterprise, how do you do it? Do you do it yourself, or do you get somebody else to help you? And a neutral host might help you in deploying the infrastructure. In some cases, pay for it. In some cases, the enterprise that will pay for the network, but the neutral host can run it. Or it could be a mobile operator or any other service provider that does a similar, performs a similar function. So they can work with the enterprise in a partnership and deploy the network and the services and the enterprise needs. So, and I think that this is actually the most interesting part, because we don't know exactly how it's going to pan out, because so many models are possible. And they all have their own advantages in different places. And if you look at it, this multiple business model approaches are also reflected in the vendors' approach. So I'm not going to make names here, but if you look at the different equipment solutions, they're not all the same. They're all using the same band, but in some cases you have a more of a cloud-based approach, more of a edge private, edge approach. So there is more at the edge, more at in the cloud. So there is some flexibility in terms of the equipment to support different models, indoor, outdoor, and so on and so forth. So I think that that's all quite interesting. And so, maybe David, you want to comment on, so what kind of models do you think will prevail, and how mobile operators will play into this?
Okay, so what kind of deployments do I expect the mobile operators to make with CBRS? Is that kind of the
other than the obvious one, which is to increase capacity indoor and outdoors. I mean, will
sure, right.
Enterprise, you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, so I think maybe the obvious one, at least from my perspective, the obvious one is that the mobile operators are looking for ways to add capacity in the urban and the suburban markets, right? That's where they tend to get the greatest aggregate demand, the most load on the network. That's where they're looking to do densification. Again, going back to your point about, millimeter wave coverages and things like this, right? So where they're deploying millimeter wave, well, it's, Miracle Mile and in Chicago and places like this where they've got, very, very heavy footfall of public users. And so I think, CBRS is a natural type of fit there, whether it's, being utilized at the PAL tier where you've got the exclusive rights to the spectrum, or perhaps even at the GA tier in more the suburban areas where there may not be as many competing demands for the spectrum. But yeah, I mean, so, deploying CBRS capable small cells that can use the CBRS as a carrier aggregation mode, where you're aggregating that with other licensed bands and potentially even unlicensed bands to add additional capacity. I think that's just sort of a no-brainer. But I think, Monica, to another point that you made, perhaps the more important opportunity almost for the mobile operators will be leveraging CBRS to get in building, right? And I would agree that, for whatever reason, we don't need to go into the justification or the different theses here, or theories here. The premise around small cells that would be based on, carrier-owned licensed spectrum really hasn't taken off. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. Again, we won't go into it. But I think CBRS could be the key to really unlocking that, and I think it will be. I think if you combine a neutral host technology that allows sort of back-end roaming to different mobile operators from a single infrastructure, and then you're able to deploy a common band, which is really what CBRS is. It's a band that can be shared amongst all different use cases, but certainly amongst the different mobile operators and their subscribers. I think when you combine those things, it gets to a premise which is very attractive to the building owners and CIOs and IT managers, because now I can deploy a single set of infrastructure that's deployed in a manner and with the economics more similar to Wi-Fi than traditional cellular solutions. And I can potentially leverage that to support cellular subscribers of, all 4 of the tier 1s, for instance, and not have to think about installing separate discrete solutions for each of those, or to put in a multi-million-dollar DAS system and then hope that the carriers will come and camp and put their baseband on my DAS. This is a whole different new deployment model, and so I think that is a big opportunity for the carriers. And I think, as you said, as they're interested in delivering enterprise managed services, CBRS gives them, a much different value proposition to do that with. And that's true for the mobile operators. It's true for, everybody providing managed services, from mobile to cable to, the traditional tower and neutral host solution providers.
Okay, I see that there is also some other questions that came through the chat, but I saw 2 people that are asking about roaming. One is about roaming in general, and the other one is the subscriber management in a non-service provider use cases. And in this case, will industrial users have their own HSS and EPC, or will they roam with one or more service providers? Now, let me comment a little bit on that, on the roaming part, and then we can add on to that. So there, again, we're going to see a lot of variability. So in some cases, there's going to be and this is, I think, it's a major strength of an approach like CBRS. You can have large enterprises taking more of an active role in having their own infrastructure, their own core functionality, and smaller ones that do not want to deal with it to rely on the core functionality provided by service providers. So there is going to be, or cloud-based, so there's going to be a lot of variability in there. But I think that the roaming is going to be very important. And I think that we need to think about the roaming, not just in terms of the roaming with mobile operators, which is certainly available, it's a possibility. And in fact, especially if you have an enterprise, you have your private network, you're working with a neutral host, you can have a roaming relationship with mobile operators. And that's, it's not there yet, even for, if you think about it, even for voice over LTE, we're still struggling, and, for just being out for a long time. So roaming will always take longer, because you need to have the networks, and then you can start working on the roaming part. But we do have a good infrastructure through 3GPP. So that can happen from a technology point of view, but I think we need to look at it, there is more than that. And there is more than that, because when you have multiple private networks that that might or might be not linked to mobile operators, you do open a whole set of opportunities and needs in terms of those networks to be able to authenticate and manage their own users and share users. So if you go from one network to the other, you might want to be able to connect, having a roaming-like type of relationship, but doesn't necessarily go through the SIM card, or doesn't necessarily go through a SIM card that a mobile operator uses. So, and there is a lot of work that it's being done by the CBRS Alliance, and that reflects the need to for enterprise private networks, neutral hosts, whoever deploys a CBRS network, to be able to provide access and to roam onto each other networks in a different way. And eSIM is going to be very important in enabling that, because it's a way to do that so that you can use the same handset with basically different SIM channels, so you can support different operators, but also to use SIM-based authentication. And I think that this is going to be quite important, because on CBRS we focus on access, but there is more. I mean, the RF access, but in order to be connected, there is more than that. You need to be able to provide the security authentication and all in a seamless way. So I think that that's important. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think, let's see, I think there are two sort of separate leading questions. The first one being about subscriber management and more of a private LTE type of deployment, and who provides the APC and like the HSS type subsystem. It would depend, right? I mean, so that's obviously a necessary component. You've got to get subscriber identity onto your end user devices, whether that's physical SIM, eSIM, potentially even something different, such as a TLS certificate in the future. But you've got to have a subscriber identity there that's then tied into your EPC subscriber management. So how that's delivered, it could be, as Monica was alluding to, it could be that you're getting a private LTE service that is deployed and managed by a operator, and that could be, again, anything from a mobile to a cable to a neutral host solution provider, and they may have an EPC which has a multi-tenancy capability, and they can give you sort of a virtual slice of these different EPC components, including the SMS, where you can, that is subscriber management, where you would go in and you would provision your clients and manage the identities for your portion of the network. So I mean, your portion of their network, right? If you're doing this as a managed service, others will be happy to sell you an EPC instantiation that you could deploy on-prem. And I think the deployment scenarios there are largely going to be based around expertise and familiarity with with managing the cellular core, and that's something that a lot of enterprises would be, in my opinion, quite happy to outsource to somebody else, or at least have abstracted from them, as a cloud type of a service that they can just contract with somebody to provide. Other more sophisticated and large users, and others who may have specific privacy, data privacy or security needs, and or just the wherewithal to manage their own EPCs may actually stand up EPCs on site or within their own networks, I should say, not necessarily single campus. And I think that depends on, again, the level of technical sophistication and also some of the security and privacy issues associated with that. But I think we'll see a variety of solutions. I've certainly seen both models being deployed for trials of CBRS, both local EPC as well as cloud EPC, and then cloud EPC being more of it's really a single instance of an EPC, but there are different slices that can be allocated to different customers or tenants. So that's my answer on private LTE and subscriber management. Roaming, we start having that conversation, we kind of go back to the premise that CBRS will help really solve the in-building cellular coverage issues because it will be able to support the subscribers of various MNOs over a single radio and a single frequency. And that presupposes then that neutral host network at that, let's call it an enterprise, at that enterprise will be able to interconnect back to the at least the subscriber systems, if not the accounting systems, of that home operator who actually owns the SIM on that client, or the identity on that client. And we absolutely realize that that's a lot of the work that's gone on up till now in our network services task group, and the technical working group has been around defining these neutral host network, or NHN, capabilities. How does the network signal to the client that it's a neutral host network? How does the client recognize that? How does it query the network for the available home operators that can be authenticated at that neutral host venue? How is that list of home operators returned? And then the flows back to the home operator once the local connection, the local over-the-air connection is made. And I will say, we're not trying to recreate the wheel here. I mean, there's a lot of great work that's been done for years and years and years by, certainly 3GPP and GSMA, but then also by Wireless Broadband Alliance. They've done a lot of work around this in a Wi-Fi context for public Wi-Fi roaming back to mobile operators using SIM-based identity. So we're leveraging a lot of that, work that's in place to use radius and diameter signaling from a neutral host network back to the home operator for both the authentication and the accounting flows. And I think I saw a question from Betty Cockrell, I know well from WBA. And so Betty, it's really quite similar to what you've seen in the past with public Wi-Fi to MNO interconnect, what we're doing here.
Yeah. Now, one thing is, I see a few questions, and I'm kind of like all sort of summing up about the implications for other countries. And in the same way that you're not trying to reinvent the wheel, I think that CBRS might have a very positive impact in encouraging somewhat similar approaches in other countries. And it's not going to be exactly like CBRS, because CBRS is very specific to the way the legacy the incumbent users are in the country. But I think that there is an interesting trend, and in Japan there has been a lot of activity. In Germany there is the 3.7 band for enterprise, and it clearly is very different from CBRS, but you have the idea that there's a similar approach in that you realize that verticals and different type of verticals need to have access to spectrum. So it's more than just basic cellular licensed spectrum. And in my mind, the most innovative ones is actually in the UK, where they're trying to allocate spectrum in the same band to different users in different places. And again, it is not the same as CBRS, but it's the concept is that I think it's very important, is that it's not just the cellular networks using licensed spectrum in a national footprint, but in order to reach everybody, in order to reach every place and to support different services, you do need to have different ways to allocate and use spectrum. And sharing spectrum leads you to greater efficiency, because if you look at licensed spectrum, it's necessarily, there is some level of necessary inefficiency because only one user can use it. And the operator doesn't necessarily need the spectrum or can use the spectrum everywhere. So that seems like an important step towards using a scarce resource as the spectrum is in a more efficient way in different countries as well. And so Dave, is the CBRS Alliance, I mean, clearly your focus is the US, but are you working with other partners internationally, or other entities in other countries in this regard?
Yeah, it's a good question, Monica. And so the CBRS Alliance, as you just said, is really focused specifically on LTE and now 5G NR solutions for the CBRS band in the US. And that's the limits of what the Alliance is doing at this point. So, that's the constraints that we're operating under, or the bounds that we're operating within, I should say. I will say personally, I am following very keenly what's going on internationally, and yes, I've seen the local licensing approaches that have been available for some time. In Holland, for instance, they've offered local licensing at 3410 to 3800 for about 2.5 years now, and that's led to a variety of interesting industrial and enterprise deployments, including healthcare. And now, as you mentioned, Germany is looking to do some local licensing at 3.7 to 3.8, specifically for industry, right? So that was really German some German industrial companies came together and were able to make the case with the regulator there that some portion of spectrum should be made available for really private industrial uses. And again, I think that loops back to the conversation we were having about you know, the kind of obvious ROIs for industrial users who would like to operate their own LTE and then 5G networks. Yeah, and then you mentioned the UK, and the UK is looking at something very innovative in 3.8.4.2. It's more of a local licensing approach, at least initially, where they would have low power and medium power licenses, which are, to my mind, somewhat analogous to what we have in CBRS with Category A and Category B CBSDs. The power levels are somewhat similar. They are putting some constraints around medium power, like where they can be deployed. Initially, they're looking at a manual coordination regime. So essentially, you know, Ofcom would review the applications and then look at the the frequency allocation table, and then you know, assign unused frequencies as applications come in on more of a first come first served basis. I believe at some point that'll have a scaling issue. I think, frankly, in Holland they've already started to hit some scaling issues where they've issued licenses. And then somebody else wants a license, and then what do you do? So I think those approaches probably eventually will lead naturally into more dynamic sharing approaches. And Ofcom, I think, to their credit, was even asked in their consultation, you know, they basically said we want to start with manual coordination because we think it gets us to market faster. But they've also solicited suggestions and comments from industry about dynamic sharing proposals with database and geolocation information as a future sort of enhancement to the system. So we'll see how that goes in the UK.
Yeah, there is, yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how this develops. I was just looking at the responses to the consultation. They got a huge number of them. It's just, it was just closed a few weeks ago. Another thing that I saw a bunch of people asking is Wi-Fi 6, and actually I was just thinking about it. So clearly with Wi-Fi 6, a lot of what the perceived limitations of Wi-Fi go away in the way that you're going to be able to manage different type of devices, access and flows more efficiently with more granularity. So Wi-Fi is going to look much more, Wi-Fi 6 is going to look more like cellular than today's Wi-Fi, which is all good. But I don't really think that, you know, this is great for Wi-Fi, but I don't think that really that creates any, it changes the relationship with CBRS, because you're going to need both. It's not one or the other, and the Wi-Fi networks are not going to go away, but there's always a need for something else. But in a way, I think that, you know, at the same time, you might face if anything, more of a challenge for millimeter wave in indoor environments. But again, you just need to we just need to get better at using different bands for different services and understand the trade-offs that each one of them has. So it's not one or the other; it's how to get them to coexist. What do you think, Dave? That
I'm not a huge fan of the food fight that goes on between, you know, Wi-Fi and cellular technologies. And frankly, whichever side is going to kill the other one, the arguments tend to be pretty uncompelling from my perspective. You know, we've heard that. Let's see, we've heard LTE was going to kill Wi-Fi. We heard unlimited LTE was going to kill Wi-Fi. We heard 5G was going to kill Wi-Fi. And I guess you're telling me that Wi-Fi 6 is going to kill 5G. I don't think any of those are reasonable, you know, predictions. My observation is that, you know, our world is becoming increasingly wireless. And, you know, I don't have any devices in this office. And I have a lot of devices in this office. None of them are wired. They're all wireless. In my office, most of that is over Wi-Fi. But, you know, as soon as I leave my house, I'm relying on a cellular service. And I don't expect that's going to change really in the near term. Yeah, Wi-Fi 6 introduces some great capabilities with OFDMA. 5G is going to introduce some great capabilities in terms of latency and capacity, especially when you're talking about the bandwidths that are available in the millimeter wave bands. You know, and I think that as people continue to find innovative things to do on mobile devices, and you know, the video consumption trend is driving Wi-Fi use, and it's driving cellular. You know, and what we're seeing is that they're both, you know, going up and to the right, and you know, nothing is it's not a one or the other. We need both technology families to succeed, and CBRS is simply a way of broadening the cellular technologies more into more deployment scenarios, such as the enterprise. I don't personally think that comes at the expense of Wi-Fi. I think that you're going to still use 2.4 and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi in your enterprise, but CBRS now gives you a different capability with some you know, spectrum that has a slightly better predictability characteristic than fully unlicensed does, even with OFDMA. So, you know, I think you could use it for some mission critical services. Again, going back to healthcare and financial services, those are kind of obvious ones. But I don't think people are getting rid of the you know, the large swaths of unlicensed bandwidth spectrum that they can use for, you know, the majority of their traffic, and will continue to use for the majority of their traffic, which is what the Wi-Fi industry represents.
Okay, I think it's we're at the top of the hour, so we have to let go, unfortunately, because we have so many more questions. So what I suggest is that you grab either Dave or I or Tim at ConnectX and ask us those questions, or we can follow up afterwards. And I would like to thank you all for listening in and asking questions. And I'd like to ask Dave and to thank Dave and Tim for participating as well. The webinar will be available offline, and we'll send you details on that soon. So thank you all, and we look forward to see you at ConnectX.
Thanks, Monica. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Monica.